Most of us have heard the common wisdom surrounding passwords. Don't reuse them, make them complex, and don't write them down. Many of you watching this probably do your best to comply with this advice in various ways. But this advice is actually wrong. In this video, we'll talk about why the advice for passwords has changed, what it means in practice, and how you can actually get ahead of the game when it comes to passwords. In order for any of this to make sense, we need to understand how passwords work in the first place. But I don't mean the technology behind it, so don't worry, we won't be getting too technical. The first password was created at MIT in 1961. At the time, MIT had created the first multi-user computer, so the main goal was to compartmentalize each user's data. While this architecture did include some actual technical security enforcement, this was way back at a time when cybersecurity was a pretty new field and threats were extremely limited compared to today. There weren't a lot of users, attackers, or devices online, and most digital data was mainly stuff like university research, not the stuff you'd find today like state secrets or financial information. Fast forward. As the internet grew and became a vital part of our everyday lives, a lot of that technology simply scaled with it. We have other videos about email and messaging that give specific examples, but simply put, in most cases, these protocols and systems were never designed with security as a priority. It was added on later as a band-aid, and poorly at that. Passwords are no different. Regardless, as more people and devices moved online, the focus became trying to encourage everyone to use secure passwords. This is where many of the rules we know today came from. One lowercase letter, one uppercase letter, a number, a special character, never write it down, and change your password periodically. Companies and websites began to force compliance with these requirements as early as the 1980s. We'll talk about the why behind this advice in a moment. But the first password manager didn't appear on the scene until the late 1990s, so people were largely left to figure out how to manage these complex password requirements on their own. And this created a perfect storm for trouble. People are often a lot more predictable than we like to admit. Humans, by nature, strive to be efficient and find patterns. We pick the path of least resistance, even if we try not to or it's irrational. So it makes sense that without help, such as password managers, people started picking passwords that were easy to remember but still technically complied with the requirements. For example, someone might pick password as their password because it's impossibly easy to remember. And after modifying it to meet the requirements, they'd end up with password, which isn't really more secure but meets the requirements. Technically speaking. At least the enforceable requirements. At the time, companies really had no way to check for things like password reuse. For years, this is largely how society operated. Even once password managers did arrive, they wouldn't start to see wider adoption until the 2010s, and even today, adoption remains shockingly low. In the meantime, NIST formalized password recommendations using most of the established criteria, and even now many of us are still stuck in these patterns. That's when the data breaches started. In the late 90s, the internet started to go from something reserved for nerds and businesses to being more common in residential homes. By the early 2000s, that meant data breaches and cybercrime were taking hold. Once websites started getting hacked and the data they stored started to leak, passwords were one obvious goldmine. And to our horror, it turned out that even if the passwords were hashed using best practices, most were quickly cracked, and for the first time, we began to get troubling insight into the trends and problems with existing password practices. Before long, credential stuffing emerged as a common practice, which is when attackers use a known username and password combination across multiple services. If you reuse the same username and password on multiple sites, all it took was one data breach to make them all accessible. This is still a common thing, by the way. The password landscape was basically a smoldering post-apocalyptic ruin. But how did we end up here? What went wrong? A password strength is measured in entropy, which basically puts the difficulty to guess or crack a password into an objective measurement called bits. There's actually a specific mathematical formula for calculating entropy, and you may have guessed that this formula is based on factors like length, special characters, and numbers. The more possible variables in your password, the higher the entropy and the stronger your password. This was the logic behind the 2004 recommendations. But entropy is more than just complexity. It's also about randomness, or put another way, uniqueness. A 2010 study analyzing a large collection of data breaches found that because users tend to pick and reuse easy-to-guess passwords, entropy is a poor metric for measuring strength in the context of password complexity requirements. If a system doesn't have additional safeguards, like comparing if your chosen password shows up in a known data breach, for one example, it can be easily fooled into thinking that a password is secure based on complexity alone, not realizing that even a basic dictionary attack would have no trouble with it at all. So in 2024, NIST updated their password recommendations, trying to take into account what we've learned in the last 20 years and correct course. The new guidelines have dropped all complexity requirements and periodic password changes, and instead focus on encouraging users to use long passwords, at least 15 characters ideally, but up to 64. So does this actually fix anything? Let's compare two passwords to find out. One complex password meeting the old requirements in both spirit and letter, and one focusing strictly on length per NIST's new guidelines. You might think that the first password seems very secure, or if you know a little bit about this topic, maybe you'll think they're just as secure as each other. But in reality, the first password has 60 bits of entropy, while the second one has 75 bits. And that may not sound like a huge difference, but what that means is that in the right conditions, the first password could be cracked in a matter of days or maybe weeks, while the second one would take thousands of years. The most visible difference, though, is that the second password is exponentially easier to memorize. In fact, you could probably memorize it by the time this video is over. It may seem counterintuitive, but the reason that this works is because one of the most important factors in entropy is length. Each additional character could, in theory, be any one of dozens of possible characters. This exponentially increases the possible solutions with each additional character. In fact, the updated NIST guidelines specifically suggest that companies should accept basically all common punctuation and symbols, dramatically increasing the possible characters, so that even a small increase in length adds a lot of possible guesses. We generally refer to passwords like this, that are strong but easy to remember, as a passphrase. Ideally, a good passphrase should be at least 5 random words, but you can do more if you'd like. Bitwarden has a free page where you can generate a secure random passphrase, but if you don't trust a website, you can also do this offline with just some dice using EFF's Diceware system. This creates a passphrase that's at least as secure as a traditional password, but still easy to remember within a day or two. Now, we keep harping on the fact that passphrases are easy to remember, but why does that matter? You probably heard the claim that if you know your password, it's probably not a strong password. That's just a shorthand. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's more of a catchy soundbite referring specifically to the kind of bad passwords we called out earlier. Human memory isn't that great, so if you can remember a password that complies with the old requirements, odds are that it's a bad one, like the examples we were using. Memorizing a good passphrase is okay, and actually smart in some cases. There are certain passwords that you simply have to remember, like the password to log into your phone or your computer, and this is where passphrases are most useful. They're the perfect combination of memorable and secure. But now we're getting to a new problem. The average person has well over 100 passwords, and some of NIST's advice remains, like not reusing passwords. In fact, the updated guidelines explicitly call out password reuse as a major threat still. As you may have guessed by now, that leads us to another outdated piece of advice, which is to never write down your passwords. This is another one that was never actually formalized by NIST and acted as another shorthand, referring to the trope of people writing down their password on a sticky note taped to their computer monitor. But truthfully, writing down your password somewhere safe is actually a really good idea. We've mentioned password managers several times now, and a reputable password manager remains one of the best ways to record and manage all your passwords, as well as other login information. At the time of this video, our top picks for most people are Bitwarden, ProtonPass, and 1Password, although 1Password doesn't have a free tier. If you'd prefer an offline password manager, we recommend KeePass XE, but just remember that an offline password manager means you'll have to be very organized at keeping it in sync across devices and keeping good backups. If this hasn't been a good enough sales pitch, you should also know that password managers have other quality of life features, such as the ability to autofill your credentials on websites, go straight to the login page, help avoid most phishing attempts, and even generate new passwords or passphrases on the spot for you. Of course, once you're using a password manager, you're centralizing risk. You're putting the keys to your entire digital life in a single place, so it is extremely important to secure your password manager accordingly. As mentioned earlier, we turned to the passphrase to help us create a safe yet user-friendly solution. Also, two-factor authentication. You should be putting as many locks on your password vault as possible, including this one. We have a page all about that we'll leave in the show notes. If you were already using a password manager before watching this video, you are ahead of the game. Let us know what your choice was in the comments and why you'd recommend it. If not, after learning all of this, the next step after picking one and getting signed up is to add all of your existing accounts to your password manager and update them with better passwords. It will take some patience, but your bank accounts and sensitive data will thank you. Keep in mind that you probably don't have to do it all at once. Just make it a habit to simply get your accounts updated the next time you log into them, and you'll be done before you know it. Despite these updates and NIST recommendations, which are clearly improvements over the old ones, it's very likely that many websites and services will continue to enforce the outdated guidelines for a long time. That means you may still be forced to use your password manager to generate the old-style complex passwords. And that's okay. Whichever method you use doesn't really matter. If the website or app you're using doesn't limit the length or complexity, many people find passphrases more convenient, just in case you ever have to manually type it out sometime for whatever reason. On the other hand, if a website limits you to something like 16 characters, or if they're still following the old advice, going with a totally random password allows you to cram a little bit more security into those requirements. The new guidelines are focused on finding a solution that stays secure while also accounting for the human element the previous recommendations ignored. And it seems like they did a pretty good job. But if you want to get ahead of the curve, there's actually an even better way to protect your accounts. It's more secure, it's easier, it's spreading quickly, and as a bonus, it'll work with any of the password managers we just recommended. Before I tell you about that, I want to ask for a quick favor. If you're finding this video helpful, it would really mean a lot if you could help support Privacy Guides. We're an independent nonprofit, meaning that we don't make money the way most YouTubers do via things like sponsorships or affiliate links. Instead, we rely on community support. You can sign up for a membership and get early access to videos, bonus content, and special perks on our forum, or you can pick up some merch at shop.privacyguides.org. Every little bit helps. You've likely heard about passkeys. They made a big splash when they got announced a few years ago, but since then the hype seems to have died down. Still, many websites and apps have been quietly rolling them out. Again, I promise not to be too technical, but if you're familiar with PGP, passkeys work in a very similar way. When you register a passkey with a website, a key pair is created. Think like a lock and key. The public key gets sent to the website and the private key stays with you. When you log in, the keys get compared and authenticate you. Conveniently, this design makes passkeys orders of magnitude more secure than a password or a passphrase. They can't be handed over in a phishing attack since the fake website doesn't have the public key, and since the entire process happens invisible to you, there's no risk of creating a weak key. In many implementations, the passkey also serves as a one-click sign-on, so they're even more convenient than passwords too. The most common method for most people to manage their passkeys, if they have any, is probably on their phones. That's because in recent years, companies like Apple and Google have built this capability directly into the operating system. This is incredibly convenient, but it can cause issues around creating backups or if you decide to move to another operating system someday. On the other hand, the most secure way to manage your keys is on a hardware security token such as a YubiKey or a Nitro key, but this also has some drawbacks. For one, these tokens can be a little bit pricey for some. Furthermore, it can be hard to make backups with this method, and some hardware keys have a limited number of slots available, so you might run out. The most convenient method for most people will be to simply save your passkey in your existing password manager. This solves the issue of storage space, and in most cases will solve the issue of price. Most popular password managers also support passkey import, so you can easily switch password managers if you want. But you should be aware that because of the credential exchange protocol, it's not the same process as a typical import-export. Be sure to check your password manager's help documentation for details. Still, this is probably going to be the sweet spot for most users. If you want to see which services currently support passkeys, and there are probably more than you'd expect, you can check out 1Password's passkey directory or Bitwarden's passkey index. Both are free and publicly available. We also have an article from last year that really dives in deep into the history of passkeys, how they work, and everything else you might want to know. So if this video leaves a little bit to be desired, definitely check that out. But for now, the main takeaway is that we strongly believe in passkeys as the best way forward. We mentioned earlier that a lot of existing tech is legacy tech, and attempts to fix them are usually just band-aids that don't solve the underlying problems. Password length and complexity is an example of this, while passkeys represent a brand new, from-the-ground-up approach to account security, more fitting for the modern internet. We recommend you use them on any sites that offer them, and for sites that don't yet, your password manager can still generate and store strong passphrases or passwords. We've thrown a lot of information at you in this video, so if you're finding all of this a bit overwhelming, check out our video from earlier this year about how to pace yourself and make sustainable changes to your digital life, and you can use that advice to implement what you've learned here.